So we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Education Policy Seminar. My name is Eliza Hussain, and I'm a PhD student in Education Policy here at the Curry School of Education. This talk is part of the Education Policy Seminar series sponsored by the Banker Fund for Political Economy. Each semester, EdPolicyWorks hosts a number of talks that are free and open to the public. For more information on EdPolicyWorks or the next seminar, please visit our website. Today, we're delighted to welcome Dr. Constance Lindsay. Dr. Lindsay is a research associate at the Urban Institute, where she studies K-12 education policies. She earned a doctorate in human development and social policy from Northwestern University, where she was an IES pre-doctoral fellow. She received a bachelor's degree in economics from Duke University and a master's degree in public policy from Georgetown. Before her doctoral study at Northwestern, she was a presidential management fellow at the U.S. Department of Education. Since leaving Northwestern, she has worked in education policy in various contexts, applying her research training in traditional studies and in creating and evaluating new systems and policies regarding teachers. Dr. Lindsay's areas of expertise include teacher quality and diversity, analyzing and closing racial achievement gaps, and adolescent development. Her work has been published in journals such as the Educational Evaluation and Policy Analysis and Social Science Research. Dr. Lindsay will be talking for approximately 1 hour, and will leave about 15 to 30 minutes for discussion and questions. Please note that any additional questions at this time can be addressed after this time can be addressed via email as other meetings will begin. Thank you for attending the Education Policy Seminar today. Please join us for the next talk, and please join me in welcoming Dr. Constance Lindsay.
Thank you. That was a very long introduction. All right, so today I'm going to present some of my work that looks at the long-run impact of having a same-race teacher. And this is actually joint work with a bunch of different colleagues. So Seth Gershenson, who's at American University, Cassie Hart, who's at UC Davis, Josh Hyman, who's at UConn, and then Nick Papa-George, who's at Johns Hopkins. And so we're all folks who are interested in education and achievement gaps. So I'm not going to spend too much time talking about sort of the motivation behind the study. But we know that we have these long-running and well-documented educational attainment gaps between socio-demographic groups. And these are policy relevant for a whole host of reasons, things like your eventual attachment to the workforce, other sort of non-cognitive outcomes, and then just sort of the positive benefits of having dense college-educated communities. But you might also be concerned that these gaps reflect suboptimal investments in human capital, in particular for historically disadvantaged groups. And even though people have sort of been studying these gaps for quite some time, the sources of these gaps are poorly understood, right? We wish we knew more about them, and in particular, we wish that we knew more about how to fix them. And we know that these gaps have their beginnings as early as, these differences appear as early as kindergarten, okay? Or maybe even before kindergarten. They persist throughout K-12 and into post-secondary education. But sort of running alongside this, we also know, I think it's widely accepted, that teachers are one of the most important in-school factors in your K-12 years. But with a handful of exceptions, value-added measures of teacher quality don't correlate with readily observable teacher characteristics, right? So that limits the policy relevance of the knowledge that teachers matter and vary widely in quality, okay? So keep that in the back of your mind. Another sort of motivating factor is that right now there's a sort of national debate around sort of teacher diversity, national concern around this. And this is largely driven by the fact that we have this large gap between teacher and student demographics. So at the Urban Institute, we put out a data visualization that sort of shows that amongst 25 through 34-year-old teachers, they are largely not reflective of the larger public school student body. And this is probably going to persist for the foreseeable future. So nationwide, about 40% of students are non-white, but only 17% of teachers. And so here's one snapshot from that data viz that we did at Urban. And if you look at the blue bars, they're teachers. The yellow bars are students. you can think about the differences between the bars as representation gaps, right? And so this is that very oft-cited figure that 80% of the workforce is white. 80% of the teacher workforce is white. What's especially striking, though, in this particular graph, though, is that we have this huge gap for our Latinx students. I'm not going to talk too much about the Latinx teacher-student match, and I'll talk to you guys about why that's the case in a second. But we have these gaps, and they are relatively stable over time. And I'll show you some state-specific data that shows the same thing in a few slides. So where does this all sort of connect to each other? There's mounting evidence on the relationship between having a same-race teacher and positive outcomes for students of color on a variety of sort of short-run, intermediate outcomes. So, as most of you probably know, sort of the seminal work in this little subfield is done by Tom D., where he very smartly sees that you can use Project STAR data to sort of exploit the fact that people are randomly assigned to teachers of the same race. My colleague Anna Galatay has another paper that looks at test scores in Florida and finds the same thing, so sort of this short-run same-race match. I have a paper with Cassie Hart that looks at exclusionary discipline. So if you have a same-race teacher, you are less likely to experience exclusionary discipline, which is things like suspension, expulsion, all of the discipline that sort of takes you out of the classroom and might put you on what they call the school-to-prison pipeline. And then my colleagues have a paper that looks at teacher expectations. So all of these papers are sort of, everybody's like running these papers now, right? But these are all focused on short-term outcomes. And I sort of joke that, like, you can write this paper in lots of different fields. You can write it for nurses, you can write it for doctors, you can write it for whoever, unfortunately. So one of the things that I'm going to do today is think about sort of this long-run outcome as another outcome that we should focus on. But what's interesting, too, is that this teacher-like-me literature documents similar effects in all kinds of contexts, right? So not just the K-12 educational setting. Also in community colleges, traditional colleges, and in law school, okay? So the law school paper says, like, if your first semester law school teacher is your same race, you're going to get a better grade, right? And then that has implications for things like job placement, things along those lines. Okay. So what are we trying to do in this particular study? So in this study, we're going to look at this long-term impact of having a same-race teacher. And to our knowledge, this is the first study of its kind that says, okay, sort of to what end do we want to have these teachers, right? We believe it matters for things like test scores, discipline, things along those lines. But we really ultimately care about other outcomes such as high school dropout, college attendance, some of the things that we think are connected to, or we know are connected to later on life success. And so basically what we're trying to do is identify a causal effect of exposure, and hopefully by the end of the time I'll have convinced you guys of that, maybe not, of having the same race teacher in elementary school on these long-run investments of human capital. Okay, so we have a few research questions that have sort of evolved over time, but the main research question is just very simply, does having a same-race teacher affect your long-term outcomes? So things like high school graduation, your college intent, and then your enrollment and graduation, okay? And then the second set of research questions I think we don't, we try to answer, but I'd love to have more discussion about, ways in which you can really answer these questions. But we're going to try to think about what mechanisms through which these effects might be happening. And so to the extent we can do that in longitudinal administrative data, we're going to try to rule out some things. And, maybe what we can learn about the role of teachers and why we might observe these effects. I don't think we do a great job of that third question, but that's what we're setting out to do. Okay. So just to give you a preview of findings, what I'm going to do is I'm going to present results from administrative data in North Carolina that uses a quasi-experimental design. And then we're also going to use data from the Tennessee STAR experiment. And what's going to happen is that we're going to find similar results in both settings, which we think is pretty compelling evidence of a relationship. And so we find that black students who are either as good as randomly assigned or randomly assigned to a black teacher in earlier grades are more likely to aspire to college, and I'll talk about how all this stuff is technically defined in a second, less likely to drop out of high school, and more likely to attend college. And what we find which I think might help us to uncover some of the mechanisms, is that the high school dropout effect is largest amongst black boys who are subject to what we call, or what we define as persistent poverty throughout their time in elementary school. All right, so what's been interesting about this paper is that it's gotten a lot of attention. And one of the coolest things is that there was a cartoonist who actually put together our cartoon, an editorial cartoon based on the study. And so I'll give you a second to read it. But basically, he's talking about how there's a study floating around about having just one black teacher can keep black kids in school. Then he says, not only that, their expectations of going to college shoot way up after having a black teacher. So he was on the IZA website reading the paper. And so he says, I've probably mentioned this before, so this is a black sort of editorial cartoonist. And he says, but I had only one black teacher in my 12 years of grade school, and he was an aspiring cartoonist. And so he says he doodled at his desk, and he says, whoa, that guy's doing what I want to do. So maybe he was a role model for him. But pretty interesting. I never thought I would have a study that's in a cartoon. Then he says he'd allow me to pull up a chair next to his desk. And then, I can't reiterate enough how much it meant to see someone who looks like me doing what I wanted to do. And all it took was one black teacher, no more, no less. So pretty cool. So let's jump into what the study looks like. So I'm going to present the results a little bit in different order than they are in the MBR paper. I'm going to start off with North Carolina data. And so these are administrative data that are housed at the North Carolina Education Research and Data Center, which for all the grad students in the room is a really nice place to get data from, because they make the files available for you to sort of link multiple things. So you can link teachers to students, classrooms. They have things like discipline data, very, very rich administrative data. And what's nice is that the panel is so long, you can look at some of these long-term outcomes. And so basically what we do is we look at, or we use student-level administrative data on all public school students in North Carolina who entered third grade between the 2001 and 2005 school years. And so what's nice is that they have now been, it's long enough that we can see whether they have finished high school or not, basically. And what's also nice is we can, basically when you're finishing high school in North Carolina, you fill out a little survey that says, I'm intending to attend college. So we can use that information to kind of ascertain their college intent. And so what's also interesting is that this is a sort of longitudinal version of that bar chart I showed you earlier, and just specifically focused on North Carolina. But basically it's the same thing. The teacher workforce in North Carolina is largely white. The numbers of white students is going down over time, and the numbers of students of color is increasing over time. And I just want to point out that, so we have Hispanic students in the data, and they are a growing share of the public school population. But there aren't a ton of Hispanic teachers in the data, so we can't do much on the match there. So that's why I said this is going to end up being a mostly black and white story. But I think that would be like something great for a grad student to look at, is to find a place where they have a little bit more diverse student body. And this is sort of just showing the same thing. This is just looking at the demographic representation of teachers and students by district. And basically what you find is that black teachers are underrepresented sort of in relation to how much of the LEA is percent black, and white teachers are overrepresented. So if they're hanging out above that line, it just means they're overrepresented. I'm going to move that a bit. I didn't get the word though. Okay. So the outcome measures are pretty simple. We're just looking at high school graduation and dropout. And what's nice in NC is that they track you, they have, on everybody they track both your high school dropout, whether you graduated, and also whether you just like left the state. So we think that's a good outcome measure. And then also this self-reported college intent at the time of high school graduation. So what we do sort of in this version is that we focus wholly on black students, right? They have higher than average dropout rates, lower college attendance rates than their sort of non-black counterparts. That's going to be our analytic sample. And so the main analytic sample contains data from black students who entered third grade for the first time between 2001 and 2005. And we have some alternative specifications where we look at sort of the effects for white students too, but this is what I'm going to focus on today. And so it's so a few sort of interesting things about the sample. So about 13% of all the black kids who entered during that time period of 2001 to 2005 actually dropped out of high school. So it's not a small amount. And then another big chunk graduate high school with no college intent, and about 40% graduate high school with college intent, right? And so again, that's a survey measure. It's not the best measure, and we're going to try to address that in the STAR data. But what's most striking to me about this particular chart, I'm going to show it I'll show it with bar charts too, is that over half of the students in the sample never have a black teacher, ever. And I found that to be striking. I don't know, you guys, I don't know if you can disagree with me. And so one of the things that that's been interesting to me as we sort of get feedback on this particular paper is that many people, or many black students have never had a black teacher at all, right? And I found that to be surprising. And it is the case that if you are likely to have one, you're more likely to have more than one. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so that is the four-year graduation rate, although we do exclude people. So they have like this, it's like a file that basically captures whether you left for whatever reason, so we kind of take those folks out. And then there is a sensitivity check in some version that we include those kids back in and we find similar results. Yeah. But yes, usual caveats when we're thinking about calculating graduation rates. Yeah, good question. Okay, so this is basically showing the same thing, just in a slightly different format. So another thing that we do in this sample is we divide the kids up into sort of persistently poor and not persistently poor. And so this is using the Studenarski and Micklemore measure of basically you've been eligible for free and reduced price lunch the entire time, so K through 8. And so what I'm showing here is the distribution of exposure to black teachers in grades 3 through 5, so your dosage. And so again, this just shows what I just talked about, which is that over 50% of the kids never have a black teacher. And then if you are not persistently poor, you are actually more likely to have a black teacher. But a lot of this is not statistically significant. So keep this in the back of your head because we're going to come back to this. Okay. And then we don't find lots of differences in terms of the pattern of the black teachers that you get. And so you can just interpret this. So the 000, for example, means you never had one. 001 means you had one in one in fifth grade. So remember, this is third, fourth, and fifth grade. And so we don't find lots of any sort of patterns about this. And this will also come back to. But that's just showing sort of the descriptive stats in a different way. Okay. So what do we do? So we're basically going to use an IB strategy similar to that of Bettinger and Long. And what we're going to do, or what we're trying to do, is we are going to exploit conditionally random variation within the schools over time. So in a particular year, let's say that your teacher went out on maternity leave, and then your teacher was white, and the other teacher that came in was black. We're assuming that that's going to up your chances of getting a black teacher, so that's kind of the first stage. And then the second stage is that actual match. And then we add some other things onto it to try to bolster the argument that it's a causal estimate. So we add school fixed effects, and we add linear time trends. And then I'll show you another chart where we actually do sibling fixed effects, which is something you can also do in the NC data. Okay, so what do we find? So basically so the first stage is pretty strong. What you're going to find, or sort of the main effect, is basically having this black teacher decreases the rate of dropout for all black students. And we're going to decompose it in a second, but just to show you how to read this. So this is your comparison mean. So you're just going to take the sort of point estimate and do your percentage change, and so you get a 31% decrease in dropout rate. So that's kind of how you read that. And if that's too much, just look at the negative and the stars. But what's interesting, though, is that what's driving this? So remember we have our whole sample, then we have the sample for the persistently low-income black students, and then we're going to look at girls and boys, right? And so what's driving this are the black male students, and then you see these huge results for the persistently low-income black students, okay? Low-income black male students. The girls aren't really driving this, right? This is being driven by the boys, which I think is very interesting. And also we could maybe talk about that in the discussion as well. So that's sort of the main result for the North Carolina data. So then we do a few more things. So we change the outcome to an ordinal variable, where we say your options are now drop out, graduate, or with no intent to attend college, or then graduate with the intent to attend college. And we find similar results. So you can't really pay attention to those ordered probit coefficients. They don't mean anything intuitive. But basically, these are the average partial effects. So you can read those like you would read your LPM. And so we find that the students are less likely to drop out, less likely to graduate with no intent, and then more likely to graduate college. So similar results to the main tables, just specified in a different way. And again, we see these sort of very big effects for these for the low-income students, and then for the low-income males. And you guys can jump in with questions if you need to. Okay. So one of the things that we were curious about, and this is going to then drive sort of our a little bit of our sort of understanding of what we think the mechanisms behind these effects, how they operate, is we were curious as to whether there were dosage or timing effects, right? And so dosage just means, like, does it make a difference if you get 2 versus 1 versus 3 versus 2? And then timing is, does it matter sort of in that early time period when you got the black teacher, okay? And so you can think about sort of different explanations for why dosage or timing might be explaining a mechanism, right? And so that's kind of the best we can do around trying to suss out what's happening in the classroom with these data. You can imagine if it's dosage, right? If dosage does not matter, and it's just the presence of the teacher, that implies one set of policy implications. If it's timing, maybe it sort of jives with some of the, a lot of the early childhood work, where just the earlier the better, then that also is going to drive your decision making differently. And so we want to play around with this a little bit. And so basically, we don't care too much about the equations. So remember, go back to these charts though. So we didn't find a lot of sort of significant differences between these particular groups in the patterns of the teachers. We also didn't find, and remember the other chart where we didn't find a lot of difference in what was the other one? Yeah, so we didn't find a lot of difference in the patterns, right? So that's driving this. So with dosage, we don't really find much, right? So there's a few things here and there that are statistically significant, but I don't think it's like a strong pattern of results to say that having more than one matters, okay, for these particular results. So not too much there when it comes to dosage, and this is going to pop up again during the Tennessee Star results. And then same thing, not much there when it comes to timing. Okay. So there just a lot of stuff doesn't really pop out. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Probably are significantly different from each other, and one is much bigger than the other. Am I maybe misinterpreting?
So yes, I mean you could. So yes, you are interpreting it correctly. We didn't see that the pattern was sort of similar to the other. Results. I mean, I guess there is limited evidence of the dosage, and there actually will be limited evidence of the dosage in the STAR experiment too.
Yeah. became
Yeah.
1 to minus 0.2. Again, you interpret it how you want. But
Right, yeah. You think, okay, yeah. Well, I guess we were more so looking at, well, yeah, I guess if you just look at the males, I guess we were making the argument. Okay, I will take that back to my people. Yeah. Okay.
Causality in this sample.
Okay.
And so this notion that, obviously, when you're dealing with observational data, the fact that you're in a school where you got 3 black teachers as opposed to 1, and that kids are not randomly assigned to schools, as are teachers, it sort of raises some questions about some potential selection that might be going on here.
Yeah, I would agree. I would definitely agree with that. And that's what I was kind of trying to show with, like, one, it's relatively rare that any black kids in this sample have 3 black teachers. So, yeah, so we should interpret that with a grain of salt. Okay.
Especially, I'm sorry to interrupt again,
no, go ahead.
especially if that's what's driving a lot of the overall results, and it doesn't occur often, it then begins to make you worry a little bit about the overall results. So the robustness check might be, well, let's just do this with 1 teacher and see.
Are these being driven by a few schools that are
Yes. So I don't know where they are located. I can find that out. I did have a table at one point that had like variation by school, but I don't have it in here. But yeah, I can find that out. Yeah. Because but to the sort of larger point, I'm very curious as to what are the types of schools look like that where black students have no black teachers. They're obviously going to be radically different than, so you might be some issues around making the correct kinds of comparisons. Yeah, those are good points. Okay, so then we do a few other things. So one, we just change the definition of sort of or go back to sort of how we usually do things with the ever free and reduced price lunch. And then we do always free and reduced price lunch, but for a shorter time period, and we find sort of similar results. And again, so we find, I've been focusing mostly on the dropout results because we don't find much on the college intent. And so one of the things that we hope to do with using the Tennessee STAR data is we have a better measure of college attendance. So this is just like a survey measure. And who knows, I'm sure your research interests have changed since you got to grad school. So. Okay, and so then we also do sibling fixed effects and find similar results. So pretty compelling, but to your point, these are still observational data. So one of the things that we try to do is look at this same sort of set of questions in the Project STAR data. And as you probably all know, I know David Christian knows, the Project STAR data was designed to identify the impact of class size on student achievement. And it began in 1986. So this is going to be in Tennessee, so different state, older kids, different policy context, different time period, but we're going to ask the same questions. And so this is an experiment where they randomly assigned kindergarten students and teachers to either small or regular-sized classrooms. And then over the next 3 years, the experiment continued by randomly assigning the students and refreshing the sample each year. Of course, this, you guys all know what Project STAR is. I'm spending a ton of time on it. But as I mentioned earlier, Tom D recognized that if you're randomizing teachers, you're also randomizing their race. And so there's some interesting questions that you can ask. And so originally when we did this, we sort of just took the public use data and we said, let's just do the same thing. Same sort of, same research questions. But we were able to get access to the Project STAR participants' National Student Clearinghouse data. So we can see whether they actually went to college or not. And at the time, about 80% of the schools in Tennessee were covered. So not 100% coverage, but, pretty good coverage and a better outcome than what we had before. So this augments the North Carolina analyses in 2 ways. So one, this is going to be an entirely different identification strategy, okay? And then this is also going to bolster the study's external validity. So we think the 2 data sets together are very, very nice complements. And now we have whether you actually sat and took the college entrance exam, and then whether you attended college. So not just like this sort of survey, like maybe I'll go, maybe I won't. We actually see what you did. So we think that's a better measure of college intent. Okay. And so you guys are pretty familiar with Project STAR, right? Okay, all right. So we don't have to spend a ton of time. But there's a few things that are especially relevant for us, or the most important thing that's relevant for us is that randomness was achieved in year one, okay, and that's been well established. And so we do look at subsequent cohorts, but really our results are driven by that first cohort, and that's the one that's most important to us. And let's see. Yeah, so it's affecting this 1986 cohort. So just to give you a preview of the findings of STAR, we're leveraging random student-teacher pairings, and we find that black students who are randomly assigned to a black teacher in grades K through 3 are 5 percentage points more likely to graduate from high school and 4 percentage points more likely to enroll in college than their peers who are not assigned to a black teacher. And this is actually going to end up being community college, and we don't really find much in terms of persistence, but we do find that enrollment effect. And here you'll note, so it's not 3 through 5 this go-round, this is K through 3. So a little bit earlier grades than the grades in the North Carolina study. Okay. So the data are pretty much basic data on student and teacher characteristics. We have test scores. We have a middle school survey. We have the SAT, ACT data, which was pulled from the College Board, and so Diane Schanzenbach gave those to us. And then the college enrollment data is pulled directly from the National Student Clearinghouse, and that was also a gift that I don't know if you beg for it as a gift, I don't know. But they gave it to us, right? Because otherwise we were severely limited by the outcome that we were trying to use, which in the public use data is would have just been dropout. So this is really nice. Okay, so sorry, this is kind of small, but a few things to point out. So again, over half the sample never has a black teacher, right? So I also found that surprising. Maybe I shouldn't be surprised anymore. Another thing about the Tennessee STAR sample is that it is particularly disadvantaged. About 80% free lunch. And so there's a few other things that will come up. Most of these kids go to poor schools, about 67% of them. And they're attending relatively more segregated, or they're attending segregated schools. And about 70% of them graduate from high school, and about a third take the SAT and the ACT, and then about a third enroll in college. And most of that is driven by enrolling in a 2-year college, right? So that's going to explain some of the things that we ended up finding. Other things we're able to look at are persistence into year 2 and whether they actually earn their degree. And we actually, spoiler alert, don't find much there. Okay, so here are the sort of main results for the Project STAR experiment. And so basically, if you have, so what we're doing is, so this is sort of divided into, so what you should pay attention to, or the main sort of full specification is column 2. And that's just if you had a black teacher and you're in that 1986 cohort. And so you are more likely to enroll in college, okay? So then we add a set of controls, which you don't necessarily need. I didn't put up the table that shows that the sample that randomization was achieved, because I think we all believe that. Although it's in the paper if you want to go look at it. And so basically, it's pretty straightforward to do the analyses here, right? Because it's a randomized control trial, so we find that you do have this positive impact from having a black teacher. And so what we're doing in those last 2 columns is we're looking to see whether it matters if it's grade 1, grade 2, or grade 3, and it does not. Okay. Okay, so that's so everybody, you can just pack up go home now. That's the main effect. Yeah.
Black teacher at any point, you might 1, 2, and 3. Those were not randomly assigned. Those teachers were not randomly assigned?
That's right. Yeah.
And then in 5 and 6, then does is that like looking cumulatively, like if they get exposure, then again?
Right. Yeah. So the main effect is, or the main sort of result is really that column 2. Okay, so then we do like a bunch of sensitivity checks and find a similar pattern of results. So you have that sort of baseline with the controls. We have some kids that were, some of the characteristics we don't have for them because we didn't have their name and their birthday. So we limit that to the ones that have like sort of that better match. We do a logit fixed effect. We do some two-stage least squares, and basically the pattern of results is the same, sort of no matter what the sensitivity checks are. This is pretty consistent evidence that having a black teacher increases college enrollment. Another thing that we're able to do, which is very nice, is we can look at other post-secondary outcomes. So whether you took the ACT, which is what we could think of as like an intent to go to college, a better intent than just that survey measure. It increases sitting for those exams. We find that basically the college enrollment results are driven by enrollment in community college, which I think makes sense in the Tennessee setting for this particular group. Although we got some pushback and said that maybe these results weren't as exciting because of this particular result, but I think for this subpopulation, I think these are exciting results. Not much in public 4 years, private 4 years, but again, also to remember, I don't know what the coverage is for those particular types of colleges in Tennessee at that time period, so that's something that we could look up too. And then we find a little bit in terms of persistence into year 2 and not much in terms of degree completion, right? And so that would be asking a lot of any like early intervention. So, okay. All right, so basically we find that sort of exposure to a black teacher during elementary school raises this long-run educational attainment, particularly for black male students, right? And especially so amongst those who are persistently poor. And so, so we do find, I guess, some evidence of dosage in the North Carolina data. We don't find much in terms of dosage or timing in the Tennessee STAR data. So we believe that this points to a role model effect. And if you read the NBR version, we actually spent a lot of time on this. I didn't spend a lot of time on it today because I don't think we can really say that much with these administrative data. I think that would take sort of other methods, I don't think we can say too much about what's actually happening. I think we have some evidence that it might be role models. In the NC data, we have some additional tables where we show that, so not only are the black boys in the sample persistently low income, they also, many of them do not have a college-educated parent at home. So maybe that's something about having a role model. I don't know. But we are sort of heartened by the fact that the Tennessee STAR data and the NC data give similar results, despite the fact that they're in different states, different identification strategies, and they're different measures. And so we're relatively confident that these effects from demographic match extend to educational investment several years later. And we believe that this is a really straightforward policy lever, which is just that you can assign black male students in particular to black teachers, and that might help us to close some of these achievement gaps that we are concerned about. And with that, I can open it up for questions.
Another way to frame it, instead of like the role model effect, would be a buffering against like societal expectations, and that might help think about the persistently poor black boy effect, which I agree with Jane seems to be impacted by dosage. And so, given that, and if you think that like there's an underlying mechanism that having teachers who are the same race as you could help buffer against like persistent narratives about you in society, do you know if this kind of work has been done in contexts outside of the South? Like,
yeah.
The effects. That's when I was talking about Massachusetts, which keeps these kinds of data. And so
That's a really good point. Yeah, no, there has not been, right? Because, so like, all of our papers are North Carolina. The other papers are Tennessee, and then, so like Anna Egalite and Brian Casita is Florida. Yeah, so that's a good point. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a whole. I think the other whole is places where it's not just a black-white story, too. I'd be interested to see what's happening there. But yeah, I think that's a really good point. Yeah.
I'm curious, in sort of this disaggregation of black boys, black girls, and I thought a lot about sort of the sex gender of the teacher. So I know there are a few black teachers, so
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
I'm just curious sort of what trends there might have been or if it's something you're able to.
So we don't do much on, so like, for example, with the discipline paper, we started off trying to look at gender. We don't do much on it because, like you said, it's about, so North Carolina, even as like late as like 2008 to 2013, the black male population is like 3%. So there's not much you can do in terms of the matching there. But, I mean, my suspicion is that there's probably, positive impacts.
Level, because, well, certainly at the project star data you could get school level effects, right? And I wonder if that, because if you know where the schools are located, then you might be able to get a sense of like the community and whether these effects are, in fact, I'm not quite sure, like what the hypothesis would be here, like could the effects be larger for black students who are in the communities where there are not very many other black adults around versus in an area or a census area where there are a lot, like, so that could be interesting there.
Yeah. Yeah, and that actually has come up a few times. Yeah, so in theory we could, so, we have all their like common core data, all that stuff, so in theory we could do that. Yeah. We haven't done it. Because there's lots of stuff that could be done.
I'm just trying to think about, so the instrument being with the share of black teachers at that school. I think what I'm thinking about is like potential variables that could be like correlated with that outcome. And
Yeah.
so as I'm thinking about that, I think one of the things I automatically go to is like what classes are these teachers teaching? Like, are they more likely to be teaching AP classes or like advanced classes? And then the students that are randomly assigned to them would already be like the high performing students. Are there any like sensitivity checks about that, about like that student selection?
Yeah, so so in this case, these are all going to be elementary aged folks.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So, but to your point, we don't really do any sensitivity around
Like whether they'd be gifted, I guess in that sense. So like those students.
So that's one of the controls.
Okay.
Yeah. So gifted and exceptionality are definitely in the controls in both studies. So I think we're okay on that. And so, but I think the IV gets us around like sorting. I think. I'm pretty confident. But yeah, it's possible that it's not. Yeah. But there definitely is sorting going on. It's like in our discipline paper, the principals are definitely know who's more likely to have bad behavior, and they definitely get assigned to black teachers more. So we're trying to get around that. So yeah, so your instinct is definitely right. Yeah, so I think we're making the argument that it has not. although it is well documented that there, and I don't know, it's in the appendices of the paper. I don't know it off the top of my head, but yeah, there definitely is a chunk of attrition in the study. Yeah. That's something I should know. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I know there are different theories.
Yeah.
I was wondering,
Sure.
your perspective. Why would it matter more for boys?
Right.
And even if
Yeah.
it would matter today, depending on the age of the student, does it matter whether you get a same race teacher in elementary versus in high school?
Okay, that's a really good question. So, one of the things that there's a little section in the working paper that they sent around where we try to acknowledge and sort of borrow from a very long literature on what black teachers might be doing differently, or in addition to sort of the regular canon of what teachers do. So there's a whole set of literature on culturally relevant pedagogy. And so that's basically saying I'm going to use the fact that we share a culture to sort of bolster your learning environment. And so that's one mechanism that this might be working through. Another thing that we sort of play around with is maybe it is just like a role model thing. And perhaps it's just seeing somebody that has gone to college makes me want to go to college more. Like I said, I don't think we can do a lot around this in these particular data because we can't see what's happening in the classroom. I think that would be a great project for a grad student to investigate. Maybe through different types of methods. So in terms of age, both of these studies are focused on the earlier grades. And if you believe some of the developmental work, when things happen earlier, it's better. So perhaps that is also the case for this, although in our discipline study, we find that the discipline results happen whether it's elementary, middle, or high school. And then in terms of the boy question, I think sort of African-American boys are one of the most disadvantaged groups, and so they might be especially vulnerable or especially vulnerable to discrimination in the classroom or things like being on the wrong side of gatekeeping, things along those lines. And so, they might just benefit more. But again, I don't have like a good answer for why it is the case in this particular study. But I believe it. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's kind of exactly why, right? So it's two reasons. One, so we started that like in 2016 or 17 or something, and that was like the earliest we could go with like the most recent graduation data. But then also, basically what you're doing in the North Carolina data is you have to make some assumptions to link the kids, and those assumptions are more tenable when they're in elementary school, right? So it's basically linking like who was the proctor of their end of grade exam, that kind of thing. So that's going to be less defensible sort of the older the kids get. So that's, yeah, so it's data reasons pretty much. But yeah, it could very well be the case that it matters later. So we definitely have not excluded that for sure. Yeah.
So you could imagine that some-race teachers, and we know this from the work that Tom did, but also other work, some-race teachers induce greater achievement effects.
Mm-hmm.
And the greater achievement effects then get more or less likely to go to college.
Mm-hmm.
You could also imagine that with the equivalent achievement effects among, say, black boys,
Mm-hmm.
that some may be less likely to go to college, say, for SEL reasons.
Mm-hmm.
That might have been induced by this. So I guess I'm trying to separate gratitude as a role model,
Yeah.
which I don't think are necessarily the from changes in explorations or persistence or other things that might be consistent with SEL measures that induce greater achievement. And whether that's a way for you to get a little more traction in figuring out what's going on.
Yeah, that could very well be the case. So I don't think in the NC data they measure, they have lots of good measures of SEL. There may be some student surveys that we could take advantage of. So yeah, we could do absences, yeah, that's true. Yeah. Yeah, certainly that could be the case. So it could be that I up your investment in persistence, and then that just translates later into attending college. Yeah, that's a good point.
Students.
And they probably are, my sense is that teaching assistants are more diverse than teachers, so that's interesting. Yeah.
The teacher assistants do have an impact on achievement, so that could be a way the role model versus achievement.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Can I suggest possible other maybe mechanisms?
Yeah.
So maybe my teacher colleagues can jump in on this. So I wonder, much of this seems like it's about sort of changing basically achievement or ideas of persistence or SEL in students. Is another possibility that teachers, like if you have a kid who goes into kindergarten and a teacher who is matched on grades might just understand that kid better or might less harshly rate that kid. And at least in our schools, teachers have influence on where the kids get placed, which classrooms they get placed next year. So maybe instead of it being like it changes the kids' trajectories basically within the school. And so I guess I wonder, so I was thinking about if there's a way to sort of think about teasing that out in the data. So if you have like measures of how teachers are rating sort of student behavior or student, I don't know if there are things like that. Maybe in the ECLSK data,
I was just going to say,
you can look to see.
I think people have done that.
Yeah.
But I was going to say, so so there is evidence of gatekeeper effects in our discipline study.
Yeah.
Because what happens is that, so it's not just so the outcomes go down, but what is driven by is the number of referrals. So I'm not sending you off to the principal's office for the same behavior, right? Like and then we have a study in the works on special ed identification, finds some of the same things. So that the gatekeeper is definitely a good explanation. Yeah. Like literally the number of students?
Yeah, what?
Yeah.
With that, that should be able to distinguish some. We did some research, what teachers use the extra time for more classes is one-on-one interaction with students. And so that might be another sort of.
Literature is related to role model.
Yeah.
Like outside of class education. So for instance, is the moving back to
Yeah.
Remembering that there were negative books before. Maybe if students were some high cognitive separation affects some students. And then the qualitative books. Did some interviews in one of the possible mechanisms that seemed to come out of those interviews had to do with kids that are always being released from mostly from those different moms, so being removed from potentially role model.
Yeah, so I mean, I am familiar with that literature. We haven't really made the connection in this particular paper, but one of the things that we did look at was sort of just like the effect sizes from some of the RCTs that are like specifically focused on black boys, like some of the ones that use like cognitive behavioral therapy, things along those lines. And so we find that those very intensive interventions produce results that are sort of similar to these. So it doesn't quite answer your question. So we haven't, most of my co-authors are economists, so we haven't really made all of the connections to other literatures that we should have made, but I think that's a really good point. Yeah.
Just a clarifying question.
Yeah.
So what year was census calculated?
1986.
Especially because of some of the issues with some of that long time ago.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if it affects sort of the really like the role model effect. And having those instructions really impact on that the sort of influence of the role model for a student who grew up in that is markedly different than the
Sure.
not so that I'm really making comments on media representations. Public figures that we can see and look up to may be influencing and changing the influence of the teacher role. I would think about that, and that's something that I'm not going to be classes, so I guess it's just how should we think about that, and maybe it's changed over time.
No, I haven't really thought about that. So I think if we do believe the role model thing, that is, I think that, and sort of given the constraints of the existing teacher workforce, I think that gives us a few more policy options because you can bring in folks from the community, things along those lines. But no, I haven't really given much thought to like why the same mechanism might work in the two different time periods. That's something I have to think about some more.
I was thinking about in terms of like representation numbers. And what are we getting after? Are we getting after the notion of when there is representation, making sure that all black students are getting access to what is, black teachers, right? But it also makes me question the fact that there is limited representation.
Yeah.
And so let's say there are two black teachers at an elementary school. One's second grade, one's third grade. And you're saying, let's say they're both males. Male teachers. That means from the data, I need to get all of my black boys into those classes.
Yeah.
So what that looks like in terms of, I mean, to me it seems somewhat problematic to make sure that we're ensuring that we're getting this adequate kind of representation in that sense. So is it a question of getting access for the students, or is it just bolstering representation?
I think it's both. I don't have an easy answer for that, because if I was that principal, I would make sure that they did all get, but maybe they don't have to be on the same class at the same time, but I would think that the benefits would maybe outweigh them not having it. Although, I mean, there's a large public administration literature that shows that sort of just like the regular overall representation matters, right? And so you could imagine a scenario where just the presence of a black teacher on the faculty, or you would really probably want more than one, but that presence also is going to influence other faculty, we hope positively. Maybe not.